Okay, so now it is my honor to introduce this evening's speaker. Tim Hauck is the program manager for the Pegrine Fund's Condor Recovery Program in northern Arizona and southern Utah. Tim is responsible for the successful releases of captive-raised condors into the scenic wilds of the Vermilion Cliffs, as well as the day-to-day management of the wild population. Tim is originally from Rochester, New York, and received his education at Ithaca College, where his love of birds and conservation grew into a lifelong passion and profession. He has spent the last 20 years working in the field with a variety of threatened and endangered bird species, but none more iconic than the condor. Please join me in welcoming Tim to the stage.
Awesome. Well, it's good to be here with you all. Tough act to follow. Congratulations to the award winner. I'm honored and privileged to be able to be here tonight and talk to you guys about something that I care very deeply about. So condors, the Grand Canyon, I feel like it fits with everything that you guys are all about. Condors play a really significant role in the history of the canyon, and it's a more recent history, but it is a history nonetheless. And they're kind of the greeter, if you will, for all Colorado River trips, right? Who's seen a California condor when they pass under the scenic Navajo Bridge? Yeah, exactly. So that's where we take people to go see condors. And coincidentally, that's where we take people to go down this magnificent canyon that's here, there, all around us. So thank you for having me. And I really, a lot of what I do in presentations is I try to make people converts to care about the condor. Try to tell the story of the condor and the recovery of the condor and how close it came to extinction. I think you guys are all pretty much on board with condors at this point. I don't think that you're the audience that I would aim a talk about becoming endeared to the California condor too, but maybe what I hope to achieve with this presentation with you all is to better communicate with our fellow man, with our fellow person, about how we give out information and how we create change. Science is so much about data, and it's often very data-driven, but what I've learned from working with this species, that it is so much more than data, but it's how we communicate that information and how we talk to people, and that's how we really create change. So that's kind of one of the big things I want to hit on here. And I just want to take you into the world of the recovery program because I think it's super interesting. And of course, because this is a historical society, we're going to talk a little bit about the history of the California condor as well. But for my personal history, I started working with the California Condor and the Pegrine Fund back in 2005. So I've been doing this for a little bit, and I started in the field. I started here working on the rim of the South Rim, holding up radio telemetry and tracking condors with VHF radio trackers. And over time, I grew more and more within the program, and I had the opportunities to expand my role. And at this point, I get to call myself the director of the recovery program here in the Southwest. So something I'm really honored to do, to be able to speak on behalf of this magnificent bird and to share all this with you guys. So I actually have a really quick story about, a very personal story for me. When I took a break from working with condors in 2010 for a few years, and I went into some environmental consulting. I worked for a company some of you guys might know that Steve Carruthers founded back in Flagstaff. I worked for SWCA Environmental Consultants doing bird surveys. Big shock. But I met this gal in Flagstaff that I started to become really smitten with, and I took her up here. And one of the things I was hoping to show her was a California condor, and I didn't think it would happen because they're not very common on the rim. You don't see them too often, but we came up to meet a friend to go camping, and I took her right out to El Tovar, and we walked out to the rim, and I kind of tempered all the expectations that probably not going to see a condor. It's not very likely. You don't see them very often, and as soon as we walk out to that little brick wall in front of El Tovar, a huge condor just comes soaring at eye level right in front of my face. And we got married a couple years later. So the condor has had a huge impact on my life, and I attribute it to my marriage. And so, yeah, that's where I'm at. But it's really cool to be back here at the canyon. Just hanging out. So spent the day with the family out here and had a really good day. Anyways, here's a California condor. This is a juvenile condor, a young bird, black head, gray head. The underwing triangles, those coverts we call them, are not so distinct white, but they're there. But that's a condor in flight. Condors are extremely curious and personable birds. That is one of the reasons I absolutely love working with this species. I mean, look at each one of those birds. They're all looking at you with a different side eye. You could probably make up a quote for each one of those birds. I won't try to do it right here. But I love being able to learn, because there are so few of them, I've learned every single personality for all the birds in the wild. So they all have slightly different personalities. They have different tendencies, different behaviors. They're really smart. Think raven smart. Maybe just under raven smart, but darn close to raven smart. Of course, the Navajo Bridge. This is kind of my office. I wish I could say that I worked at the Grand Canyon, but I kind of do, because this is Marble Canyon. This is the start of the Grand Canyon. So this is where, like I said, we take people to see condors, because if you're going to see a condor, that's the place. Condors, this is an adult condor, redhead, takes about 5 years of age to get there. Now you can really see those white underwing triangles, very prominent. Condors love to sun themselves. They warm up. They've got those black feathers. They're using that to kill parasites. There's all sorts of functions for warming up, killing parasites, feather lice, all sorts of stuff like that. Condors are the largest flying land bird in North America, 9.5-foot wingspan. Huge, often mistaken for small aircraft, flying into Marble Canyon Airport. Condors have a dark side. They're scavengers. These are vultures, people, you know that, but they're out there eating the dead animals on the landscape. And you look at this vast desert landscape, you might not think there's that much out there. A lot of people that come through the area, a lot of the tourists, they look at the landscape out here and they say, how can they have enough food? I mean, I think we know that there's a lot of deer, there's a lot of elk, there's a lot of livestock, there's a ton of food. And they don't tend to eat the little stuff. That's what I always find interesting. They don't tend to eat those rabbits that we see on the side of the road. They want the big, big things. So they're able to get into the hides of deer and elk that other species cannot and access that food. So they provide this really essential ecosystem service. Right? They clean up the landscape of dead and rotting animals. It doesn't sound that great. I'm glad you guys already ate dinner. And there's going to be some pictures in here just warning you now. But without those scavengers on the landscape, we see the explosion of bacterias and disease. And we've seen this in other countries around the world. India lost 99% of their vultures due to a veterinary drug that killed off their vulture population. The explosion of rabies in their country went through the roof. So the ecosystem service that vultures play and the importance and significance of those species on our landscapes are very important. And I think it's really important that we paint vultures in a very positive light, because what are they, right? They're the bringers of death, right? You read Ed Abbey, and the vultures are circling over your body as you're about to perish in the desert. Those types of images, but really they play an important role, and I think it's important to remember the importance of condors, so spread the word on that. All right, let's go back in time, because condors are a relic of the Pleistocene. They were here on this planet 30,000 years ago, in this very place 30,000 years ago. And if you saw them here in the Grand Canyon, they'd be feeding on those large Pleistocene megafauna like mastodons and woolly mammoths and giant ground sloths, saber-toothed cats, all of these really large species which work perfectly for a very large bird. Those species did not make it out of the last ice age. They did not fare very well, but the condor is so resilient, and I think that's one of the messages I'll probably drive home with you guys tonight, is the condor is an incredibly resilient species. Yeah, it almost went extinct, but it survived the last ice age, and it survived because it's resourceful. And now this is the range of those Pleistocene birds, so British Columbia all the way down to Mexico, through the entire West. There are even fossil remains in Mexico and in Florida and New York. Now, that range was drastically reduced to Southern California in the mid-20th century. One of the things that they survived on, living in that range, sea mammals. So you could often see condors feeding on beached whales and sea lions. Those were those large mammals that were left in this modern world that they adapted to. Of course, they were also able to eat some of the deer that existed in the southern Sierras, and there was a lot of livestock and ranching going on at that point. So why were condors declining? Well, we talked about changes in available forage, and I think one of the cool examples, not very cool examples, but interesting examples is the bison. There were 30 million bison in the early 1800s. By the end of the 1800s, they were down to just 1,000 individuals. And that isn't a huge food source for a scavenging species. But that is just an example of some of the impact that humans can have on a landscape, some of the things that we can do to impact ecosystems. Habitat loss, of course, North America looks nothing like it did in the Pleistocene. I think that's fair to say. Slow reproductive rates. Condors only reproduce one time every other year, and they lay one egg. So they're a very slow reproducing species, but they're also very long-lived. So they can live 50 to 70 years. Therefore, they have a very slow reproductive rate, but if you introduce any cause of mortality into that type of biological system, you're going to see dramatic effects. So it's going to be really hard to rebound. Shooting and egg collection, these are more minor causes of decline, but condors were shot. Condors are still shot occasionally, unfortunately. Their eggs are large. They're about 5.5 inches. People thought it was a unique collectible. So those are some things that happened. Poisoning is one we're going to talk a little bit more in detail about. That's one that's really impacted the species. So main causes of poisoning. In the early days, we saw arsenic, stuff, other cyanide, stuff like that was used to poison large mammal species that were large predators, such as bears and mountain lions that were killing livestock, and condors were a byproduct of that. And then the other one that many of you may know about is lead poisoning, which is the leading cause of mortality for condors. So we'll talk definitely about that one. Condor populations, you can see even in the early 1900s, there were very few condors left in North America, maybe only a couple hundred. And of interest is that we actually have a couple hundred skins of condors in ornithological collections. So one of the things that ornithologists did back in the early 1900s, we're talking the Audubons and the Petersons, they shot birds and they studied them for drawings and for collections, for scientific study. So everybody plays a role at impacting species like this. So ornithologists certainly had a hand in that too. But if you look, by 1987, condors were extirpated in the wild. There were none left, and there's a reason for that. But condors did start to rebound. In 92, the blue numbers are the captive population, or the wild population, where the orange are the captive, and the population has been steadily growing from 92 on. So one of the things that is really controversial back in the 80s was establishing this captive breeding program. And in hindsight tells us that we did establish the captive breeding program, but the interesting part is that it was contentious. And I think that's really, knowing what I know now, that's really hard to grasp. But reading the articles in the magazine articles in the papers that came out back in the 80s, there were some really staunch supporters for letting this species go extinct, for letting them die with dignity, as it was said. And the groups that were advocating for this were groups that are very well known, like the Audubon Society and the Sierra Club. There was a very strong opinion on that side that there was no saving the species. They were down to an all-time low of just 22 individuals. They were dropping fast. Condors were being found dead in the wild regularly, and they thought there's no chance of saving this species. If we let you guys take them all in or transmitter them and bring them in and try to start a captive breeding program, they're gonna die off regardless, and it's gonna be a massive disaster. So the message was, let them die with dignity. The other side was, the scientific community saying, let us put transmitters on them. Let us find out what the causes of mortality are. Let us establish a captive breeding program. Let us try and see if we can bring this species back from the brink. And obviously we know which side won. I just think it's really interesting that there was a debate. And ultimately, I think we made the right call because we have condors in the Grand Canyon. But that captive breeding program was started in 1982, and they used a technique called double clutching. And that was key to the success of the captive breeding program because these were all really novel techniques They found out that if you let a captive pair lay an egg and you pull that egg without them knowing and you put it in an incubator, you can raise that egg in an incubator. And the female will notice that she no longer has an egg, and she will recycle and she will lay a second egg. So for a species that lays one egg every breeding season, you just now doubled your breeding potential. So that was huge in getting this species up to a number where we could start releasing them back into the wild. So let's fast forward a little bit to 1996, December 12th. This was the day that 6 condors, in a ceremonious release up in the Vermilion Cliffs, were released to the wild. Huge day in the recovery program. Not too long before this, they had released some birds in California, and they were having some difficulties with those birds, and we were soon to find out that we were going to have difficulties with our birds. We tried releasing really young birds. So condors naturally fledge at about 6 months of age. Now, if you raise a bird in captivity and try to release it at 6 months of age, which we thought we were doing the right thing when we did that, you were releasing a bird that was far too immature to make it on its own without parents. And so these birds were running all over the place like turkeys. They were getting into trouble. They were finding that they didn't know what a predator was. We saw birds get eaten by coyotes. We saw birds get taken out by golden eagles. We struggled. It was a slog in the first few years, but we had condors in the wild. We had a mission. We watched each bird. We had 6 birds, and we watched them every second of the day, because what else did we have to do? We recorded every observation. And over time, we released more birds, and the population started to grow. The birds that survived started to mature. We started to see birds reach breeding age. We saw all these different milestones, and the program really started to take off by the late 90s. So a little difficult in the beginning, but by 1999, they found the Grand Canyon. So released in the Vermilion Cliffs, but 50 miles to the south was this wonderful playground of red rocks and sandstone up here on the rim and limestone, and they absolutely loved it. So we had a huge portion of the population hanging out here at the Grand Canyon. And what better place to hang out? I mean, look at this place. Plateau Point, very popular place. The roof of El Tovar was a very popular place. They really did enjoy it. And this is a hotspot map that I created from our GPS movements for the last year, just to give you guys an idea of the range of the condor. So the more red you see, the darker the red, the more activity. So the south rim there on the bottom of the map, and then you have Zion National Park up there in the top of the map, and the Vermilion Cliffs kind of in the central eastern portion of the map. All right, so releases into the wild. We've released 242 birds since 1996. On average, we release about 12 birds every year, and they have a really great survival rate. People always ask me, like, how is the survival rate, you know? And it's pretty darn good, and it's really good because we manage the heck out of these birds. We have an entire team of biologists trying to ensure the survival of each bird, because that first year is the most difficult because they don't have parents. So we're out there actually acting as parents for them. So some of the keys to survival in that first year are, on the left side is a really nice pinnacle. If you roost in a good location, you're inaccessible to predators. So that is a key to being a condor. So it takes some time. So if a bird on the Vermilion Cliffs were to roost in a poor location where it could get eaten by a coyote, we actually run up the Vermilion Cliffs. We act like a coyote, we howl, we bark, we make a lot of noise, and we scare the crap out of that bird. And that training right there teaches that condor that they should be scared of ground predators, which is a really good thing. And so a little bit of conditioning goes a long way in that first year. Golden eagles, we can't act like a golden eagle, unfortunately. I've tried, and it does not work. But they do encounter golden eagles at a young age, and once they learn the dangers of a golden eagle and the stoop and the talons that come on the business end of an eagle, they figure it out pretty quick, and an adult can evade golden eagles no problem. Access to food is the other big part. So if a condor can find food in that first year, it's doing really well. And so we actually put out carcasses. We put out calf carcasses on the Vermilion Cliffs so that they have easy access to food until they can figure out how to follow the rest of the population and forage on their own. We track the population regularly, so using radio telemetry and tags that we put on birds. Here's a tag right here just for scale. Condors are large. The tags are also quite large. Happy to pass that around later if you guys want to take a look at it. That was actually worn by one of our birds. But by tracking them, it'll lead us to places like nest caves, because ultimately that's what we're looking for: wild reproduction and self-sustaining population. And you don't get there by releasing captive raised birds. We're bolstering the population, but really what we want to do is we want to see wild reproduction. So since 2003, where we had the first ever condor hatched in the history of the recovery program right here at the Grand Canyon over in Salt Creek, we've had 62 wild hatches in the program. We've now had 8 F2 generation offspring. So that means one of the parents was also a wild hatched bird. So that's the progress that we're seeing after 27 years of a program. We have 24 wild hatch offspring surviving in a population of about 95 birds today. So more than 25% of the population is actually wild hatched. And this year we confirmed 3 wild fledges, so not too shabby. A little bit about breeding, because I think it's really interesting. First, every bird has a courtship, and the condor is no stranger to the courtship dance, and I hope that you guys can have a chance to see this someday. The best chance to see this is probably the Navajo Bridge, but the male will dance for the female, and the female has every opportunity to run like hell. This female right here, she has chosen to partake in this dance, and he will dance around her. She will often nibble back at her. They will give each other little love bites, but it's different than sunning. You can see the wing position slightly different. They're more angled down, and he rocks back and forth. And I wasn't going to dance for you, but I'm going to just do a little bit. And she is either responsive or not as he does this dance, and if she is responsive, he will get on her back and they will copulate. And that is how we fertilize an egg. And that is your biology lesson in condors for today. Generally, we find that condors pair for life. They don't always remain paired for life, but in general they do. I relate them a lot to people. We mate for life too, right? Most of the time. Just a little bit of a cute, adorable video clip and a look inside of a nest cave, because this is the complicated structure of a condor nest cave. It's the ground. So they don't build nests. They lay eggs right on the gravel, and they're cavity nesters, so often inside of caves. And they are freaking adorable when they're born. So this bird is just a day old. Yeah, just a wee little condor. And so that'll take 6 months for that condor to grow into a fully fledged condor. Here's a condor at about 4 months. This is a nest cave at the Navajo Bridge. They get all sorts of excited. They do their little flaps. They like to play. They pick things up. I mean, they're in a nest cave for 6 months in a confined space. You have to find something to do, I guess, and playing with feathers and sticks seems to be one of their favorite activities. Eventually, after that 6 months, they fledge and take their first flight into the wild. And what happens after that? We have a naked condor running around, which is a beautiful sight to see, but we can't have that because we don't have enough condors yet, and they're still very heavily managed. If we can't track the population, we risk losing individuals. And until we get the population to a level where we feel comfortable with pulling tags off, we will continue to tag birds. And so how do you trap a condor? You use a condor trap. This is a condor trap, and we call it the Derek Buckner Condor Management Facility after one of our biologists that worked. I worked with him for a few years, but he got leukemia at a very young age and left behind a wife and a son. And so in 2020 and in 2021, we built this facility and we named it after Derek. So in his memory. So every time we walk into this facility, we think of Derek. But that's how you trap a condor. It's a walk-in trap. So we put cows in there, you open a gate, they drop in, they start feeding the cows, and you close the gate, and they go, crap, we got trapped again. And it's really that simple. They're very food-driven, and they're very dominance hierarchy-driven too. So if a young bird is feeding in the trap, which generally we don't care about the young birds because they're pretty healthy, well, unless we're trapping a wild condor. But when we're trying to trap all the birds, the older birds will actually go in because the younger bird's in there, and they will kick the crap out of the younger bird and then realize that they got trapped. So, I mean, I said they're smart earlier, but they have ceiling. So these are a couple wild hatches that we tagged recently. They don't have their official number tags yet because we don't even know who their parents are yet. we draw a blood sample and we run genetics, or we take observations after we release the bird with a transmitter and a tag. You can see this is star, and that one on the right is dash. They will eventually get numbers, and they will be a full-fledged part of the population. But we also do trap birds for health checkups, and that's one of the really important things, because lead poisoning is one of the #1 causes of mortality, and ultimately the largest hurdle for recovery for condors. That picture on the lower left is a deer carcass, and all those little specks are tiny pieces of lead. Condors are really good at finding food, and gut piles, probably one of their favorite tasty morsels. I mean, there's no skin to rip through, there's no fur, it's just straight guts. They love it. And the picture on the upper right is actually lead fragments inside of the GI tract of a condor. So how do they get this? Well, predominantly from lead-based ammunition. And you can see that bullet on the left is copper jacketed, but it's a lead core bullet. Lead bullets, on average, retain 65 to 75% of their mass, depending on the construction of the bullet. The rest of that bullet, as we know, lead is very soft metal. The rest of that bullet is in the carcass. And so condors will pick that up, and often where will a scavenger go first? When it finds a carcass, it'll go to the bullet wound because it's an entry point into the condor and into the cavity of the animal. So they're really good and efficient at picking up pieces of metal, unfortunately. And that bullet on the right-hand side is a solid copper bullet. And that bullet fragments very little. It retains about 99.9% of its mass. So we found an alternative. We had to do a whole bunch of studies to find out what was causing these condors to get lead poisoning. And of course, we realized after taking blood samples for 12 months out of an entire year that the peaks came right after the hunting seasons. And so we realized pretty quickly after x-raying, I've picked up so many gut piles in my life, and x-rayed them is not the most fun job. I'd much rather track condors. But we had to find out where the source was coming from. And so by finding the source and identifying that as hunted animals, we were able to start making some changes. So we were trying to put these copper bullets into the hands of hunters. And how do you do that? Because that can be quite difficult. You're asking somebody to change their behavior to save an endangered species that they may or may not believe exists on the landscape. And so I think the approach that you take in doing that is really important, because you only get one chance to make a first impression, right? So we partnered with Arizona Game and Fish. That was the first step we took, and said, hey, we need to find a way to reach each and every single hunter, and you guys have access to each and every single hunter. And so they were actually willing to stick their necks out on the line with their constituents and say, all right, we're going to put all this information into the hunting regulations about lead fragmentation, about scavengers picking up lead fragments, about lead, non-lead alternatives, and how you can help protect condors. And not only that, but they went a step further, and they gave every single hunter who drew a tag within the range of the condor a free box of non-lead ammunition. Now, this is how you reach people. You give them something free, and you give them education and information so they can make informed decisions. We were kind of doing this at the same time where California was talking about how they were going to implement a ban on lead bullets. And we kept trying to tell them, it's like, hey, I know that we should ban lead. Yeah, we don't want lead on the landscape. But if you go there and you just throw a ban out, don't tell anybody, just throw the ban out, you're going to get a whole lot of pushback, and people are not going to buy in. You need to tell people about the issue so you can give them an opportunity to make an informed choice and then help push them in that direction and make the choice, because that's how you create change. They didn't listen. They passed a ban in 2008. Lead still remains to this day the #1 cause of mortality in California as well, even though there's been a ban for quite some time now. But they're now realizing that mistake, and they're playing catch up. But immediately it was like, what? They passed a ban that's telling me that I can't use my ammunition? Like, what are they trying to do? What's next? Are they going to take away my guns? We know how that goes. So it was not a very good first foot forward. But the steps we took here in Arizona and Utah, I'm really proud of, because we now have 90% voluntary participation from the hunting community in this range of the condor to use non-lead ammunition or haul out their gut piles. And that is a huge accomplishment. You know how hard it is to haul out a gut pile a mile when you're trying to haul out meat at the same time? That's a big ask, but we have people doing it because they want to make a difference. They've bought into this whole idea of we can be a part of conservation. And you know what? Most of the hunters I know, I confess, I'm a hunter myself, we want to be a part of conservation. We're conservationists. We care about being outdoors. We care about wildlife. Also care about putting good, clean meat in the freezer. And you know what? If you're using lead-based ammunition, there's a darn good chance you're not putting very clean meat in your freezer. And so that's one of the things I had to learn too. And the number of x-rays that I've seen, I do not eat any game meat that has been hunted with lead-based ammunition anymore because there is a high potential that I could be potentially eating that too or feeding it to my family. So personal choice, not for everybody, but that's where I stand. We did also work with the Oregon Zoo and the Institute for Wildlife Studies to start the North American Non-Lead Partnership, which I highly encourage you guys to check out. And this is an effort to take what we've learned here in Arizona nationwide, North America-wide. So not only is this a problem for condors, but we're seeing, if you talk to any wildlife rehabber, they're seeing golden eagles and bald eagles die on operating tables every year in the wintertime. And they understand that it's a problem too, with not just condors, but all scavenging animals. So we've taken this model and we've expanded it to try to bring in other states to follow this model, to bring in fish and wildlife agencies, to bring in sporting groups, all sorts of different groups that can make a difference with the hunting community to try to make a difference. And it's been wildly successful. Like we're finally starting to see that change that we had hoped we'd see, where people are starting to go like, oh yeah, I don't use that lead anymore. I use copper. It's more effective, costs a little bit more, but it takes my deer down every time on the first shot, and my meat's clean. So they're starting to be ambassadors for the rest of the hunting community, and that's what we want. We want people to be able to think and make informed choices. So we do trap and treat condors every year because of the lead poisoning issue, and this past year we trapped 74% of the population. 76% of them had levels that said this bird had some exposure to lead. It's crazy, right? Well, 43% of the birds had what we consider extreme levels. This is a level of greater than 65 micrograms per deciliter in the blood. For comparison, if you had 10 micrograms per deciliter, you'd be going to see a doctor. The acceptable limit for children is 5. And we see condors that have hundreds of micrograms per deciliter. We've had condors up at 1,000 micrograms per deciliter and survive. We've also had birds at 100 or 200 and die. So it's tricky, but what we do is we chelate those birds. So anytime we grab a bird that has elevated levels, we're able to do a process called chelation, where we inject calcium EDTA into the breast muscle. It's the same thing they would do for humans, except it would be oral for us. But for condors, it's injectable. And that helps flush those heavy metals out of the bloodstream. And those levels will drop, and we'll retest the blood, and we'll eventually be able to release the bird in the wild, usually after 8 days, sometimes 16 days, depending on how much lead it had in the system previously. So we've developed a successful treatment, and we're well on our way of trying to change the ammunition types that are on the landscape. But you can see, I mean, the reason the condor almost went extinct was almost certainly from lead-based ammunition. So it was human cause. And so that's why I feel like we need to put our best foot forward and try to save this species. And that's certainly not been easy, but I feel like we've made a lot of headway. After we treat a bird, we're able to release it. And I think this is, oh, I hope that plays. Maybe it will. If it does play, it's really cool because it gives you a really good idea of how big these birds are. Well, I apologize. That one's not going to play. But that's Angela, and she releases this bird. And if I can give you a visualization, the bird's like this, and it's huge, and it's over the top of her, and it has a 9.5-foot wingspan. So our condor population has done really well, especially since 2016. And that is because we've made a difference with the amount of lead on the landscape. We are not seeing the same number of birds die of lead poisoning every year. Yes, we're treating birds for lead poisoning, but it's not as severe as it has been in the past. So I feel like we're making a difference. Now, you see that giant drop there? That was the spring. You guys know what happened to us in the spring? We had this avian flu crap. Really not good. Highly pathogenic avian influenza. It's a it's very deadly for birds, wild birds and domestic flocks alike. And we lost 21 birds. So these are our causes of mortality. Lead's still the leading cause of mortality at 42% of our diagnosed deaths. But now we just had a new second place runner-up come into the picture, and that's HPAI, the avian flu. It's now tied with predation, which is a very natural number. We're not too concerned about the predation numbers because that does happen from time to time. But the HPAI thing is a bit concerning. So this new threat is something we're recently dealing with and trying to figure out how to tackle. But 21 birds died in 3 weeks. We recovered 17 of those 21 birds. When this first started happening, I said, you know what? We're going to try to recover every single one of those birds because, one, I don't want to leave them out there because I care about each one of them. Two, we needed to diagnose what was happening. We got that pretty quickly. But three, they also could be vectors. So if anything else fed on that bird, they would also get avian influenza. We rappelled off of cliff faces. We hiked up cliff faces. We did everything we could. Took boats down the river to try to recover birds. We did all sorts of stuff. We recovered 8 birds alive. 4 of those actually lived and were re-released back into the wild. We lost 13 known breeders. That was a huge hit to our population. So we have a whole lot of work to do to try to make up for those losses. One of the bright spots of that was the rescue of Condor 1221. Has anybody heard of this story? Did anybody get Audubon magazine and see this story? This is kind of breaking news, but we had a pair during the HPAI event that laid an egg in a cave, and we didn't know about it at the time. And then the female died of avian flu. And the male became really stationary, and we didn't know where he was. We was up in this cliff face, but we knew he was in a cave, and we thought he might be on an egg. And we finally got in there, and it turns out he was trying to incubate this egg by himself. And condors don't incubate eggs by themselves. They take turns, male and female. It's a 57-day period, and they can't do it by themselves and survive. So they have to feed. They have to pick one or the other. And we thought that he was such a good, dedicated dad that he might not leave that cave and he would probably die of HPAI himself. So we rappelled down in, we recovered the egg. We thought it would probably also be contaminated with HPAI, but we took it to a rehab facility that we work with down in Phoenix, Liberty Wildlife, and they candled the egg, and the egg was alive. He was successfully incubating this egg by himself for 2 weeks and kept it alive. Incredible. This is a picture of the egg in the cave. This is the picture of the recovery. We put it in a cooler and drove it immediately down to Phoenix. And miraculously, the egg hatched in a brooder down at Liberty Wildlife. This is it is the creepiest, cutest little thing you've ever seen. And we immediately tested it for HPAI, and it was negative. That was huge news. We thought for sure that it might be positive, and that would spell doom for it. We flew it up to our captive breeding facility in Boise, Idaho right away, so like 5 days old. And sorry it's loud, but this is just a few weeks old here. Told you they like feathers. Little penguin flippers. But if you get the copy of the latest Audubon magazine, we actually worked with them to create a whole story based on this egg rescue, and it's really cool. And it was like we needed a bright spot in this whole period of disaster, and this is what we held on to. We clung to it pretty tight. And so that brings me to the 2024 public condor release up at the Vermilion Cliffs. I don't know if you guys, anybody been to one of our public condor releases? Oh, nice. Yeah, a few of you. Great. Well, next year is going to be huge because we didn't have one this year because of the avian flu. Next year, we fully plan to have one, and we plan to release 1221, that bird that we rescued, back into the wild at the Vermilion Cliffs. So come watch us do that. It's going to be really cool. It's fourth Saturday in September next year. I have one small video to show you before I let you go. This is just something I thought would be cool to show you guys. I worked with my media guy up in Boise to create this video on kind of what we went through with HPAI and how we were going to conquer some of the difficulties of it. And one of those was building a brand new facility up on top of the Vermilion Cliffs that was HPAI safe. Any of our captive birds that come down for release, they stay in this acclimation pen up on top of the Vermilion Cliffs, and it's just got a net on top. There's a picture of it in here, but it's not safe. If any bird in the wild landed on that pen and it had avian influenza, it could pass it on to these captive birds and they could die right there in the pen. So we knew pretty quick that we had to build this new facility. Building something on a 1,500-foot cliff face is probably one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. And we did it ourselves because for some reason we couldn't find a contractor to do it. Good news is we got a screaming deal. I mean, all the labor was free and the materials didn't cost terribly much, but it was a lot. So I leave you with this video kind of about the core of the Peregrine Fund and our program and how we operate.
There are times when we find ourselves faced with unforeseen challenges. Challenges that may seem insurmountable. But the Peregrine Fund has never been one to back down from a challenge. And neither has the California Condor. North America's largest flying land bird is also one of its most imperiled. After the population crashed to a low of just 22 individuals in the 1980s, an extensive captive breeding and release program was established. Today, more than 500 of these resilient birds exist, with more than 300 free-flying individuals navigating the skies of North America. But in the spring of 2023, a challenge unlike anything we've faced before sickened dozens of condors. In a matter of weeks, highly pathogenic avian influenza, or HPAI, left 21 condors dead, and our recovery effort was set back a decade or more. But we didn't back down. We traveled countless miles on roads, on cliffs, on trails, and on rivers to rescue infected condors. We recovered an egg after its mother was lost to HPAI and flew the nestling hundreds of miles to our propagation facility to prepare her for an eventual return to the wild. And we're just getting started. Our focus now is to address this unprecedented threat and to minimize the potential impacts should an outbreak ever occur again. And so, high atop Vermilion Cliffs National Monument in Arizona, we embarked on an ambitious project, a complete rebuild of our flight pen, where young condors learn from mentor birds and acclimate to the wild prior to release. They said it wouldn't be easy. We did it anyway. 30,000 pounds of materials were transported to the top of the Vermilion Cliffs National Monument by truck, then transferred to ATVs for the last leg of the journey. Our team worked tirelessly for 7 weeks to ensure this year's captive-bred condors would have a safe space to reside upon arrival. The final product? A space as impressive as the California Condor itself. Here, the young condors will spend the next few months protected from potential exposure to HPAI as they get used to their new environment, improve their social skills, build their flight muscles, and ultimately fly free above the American Southwest. And so we take a brief moment to catch our breath, and then welcome the next challenge. There's more work to be done. HPAI is here to stay, but so are we. And so is the California Condor. The California Condor is a story of recovery. It's a story of resilience. And while this story has often been filled with adversity, it's how we respond in times of adversity that defines who we are and shows the world why we do what we do. Our job, our mission, our passion is to safeguard the future of this magnificent species. This is the work that makes us proud to be the Peregrine Fund.
All right, I think that's about it. We got a few partners, of course, the National Park Service, Fish and Wildlife Service, Forest Service, BLM, Game and Fish, Utah DNR, the Navajo Nation, and the Liberty Wildlife down in Phoenix. But aside from that, thank you guys for bearing with me through this whole crazy ride that we're on. The Peregrine Fund is pretty cool, and I'm really proud to work for them. And so if you're not a member of the Peregrine Fund, highly recommend becoming one. It's not a lot of money, and it does a lot. The dollar goes a long way. We do a lot with a little. We build stuff on cliff faces. So with that, I'll close it down. Thank you.